Maybe you've seen this in your own relationship where there's like a small argument where it just seems really small, really tiny, but all of a sudden it's this giant thing. And you're like, how did this even get to be this big? Well, typically it's because of the thought process of the story that you end up telling yourself in the situation. So like yesterday, I had this like frustrating time of trying to get stuff aligned with Facebook. Facebook was all screwed up, messed up after we got hacked a little while ago. And I'm getting this headache because I'm spending hours trying to figure out this dumb stuff. I was really annoyed, really frustrated. But then just because of that little moment, it starts to leak out in other areas. Starts to leak out and getting frustrated at the dogs. It starts to leak out and having a short response with my daughter. It starts to leak out in the response that I'm going to give to my wife. Because these small things. Now, I have those in small ways and in big ways. You have those in any aspect of the way as well. Oftentimes we call them triggers. We'll call them a moment that triggers a response. It starts to make you feel and act a certain way. And if you don't actually acknowledge it and identify it, it typically spirals you out. This might be a trigger of remembering about the narcissistic abuse. This might be a trigger of remembering the toxic person in the relationship. This might be a trigger of just like, oh, this is where we went. This is what we did. This is the new person that he's with. All these different triggers might be coming into your head. And when it happens, what happens to you? How does it spiral you out? How does it frustrate you? How does it like sideline you from the person that you're actually called to be? The hard part is a lot of times it will sideline people for days, for weeks, for months, putting them into depression, putting them into frustration, putting you into a place that you don't actually want to be. But until we actually work through the triggers, dealing with the problem that's happening and our responses to it, nothing actually changes. They'll just keep going through the same exact motions over and over and over again. So when I get triggered, I have a process that I go through that I'm going to talk to you about today. The process first is understanding that I need to take a moment and to pause and to stop. Understanding if I stop in the moment, I'm able to actually understand that the current ideas, the thoughts, the stories, the things that are going through my head might not be 100% true. They might just be my perception, my idea, my thought process, but it might not be true. If I can take a moment and stop and pause, it gives me the opportunity to start working through it. Then I start moving through, okay, what are the actual facts about the situation? Like, how does it actually break down step by step? So I stop and then we're looking at the facts. Okay, the fact of the matter is X, Y, and Z. Like, I got upset because this person did this. Okay, what is this fact? Did they know they were going to upset me? Did it even matter? They're like, what am I focused on? All these different pieces, just writing down, just these are the facts of the situation. Then as I look at that, then I have to start understanding, okay, what has been my focus that has actually got me to this place? And I start to go back and forth and realize because of the story that I'm telling myself, because of the thing that I was saying about myself or about the other person, this is how I got to this place. I got pissed off because I was inconvenienced by this person. I got annoyed because the dog didn't listen when I asked them to listen. Like silly stuff, but it goes into my head of like, oh, they didn't respect me, they didn't care, all these things. And you're going to have triggers on a day-to-day basis that you need to take a moment, you need to stop. Understand, if I stop for a moment and I start listing out the facts, then I can start to go back and forth and struggle with the reality of like, what is actually true, the facts or the story I'm telling myself? Because oftentimes we want to believe the story that we're telling ourselves versus actual reality, versus the actual facts. You've run into this with cognitive dissonance of like, do I believe his words or do I believe his actions? Do I believe what he says or do I believe what he does? Do I believe that he's not a cheater, but he's still cheating? Like what do I actually believe? It's getting clear with the facts, struggling with that to understand the story that you believe, and then moving to a place of making a decision to change that. You see, every day I'm given the opportunity to have a focus of how I'm going to live. And that focus is going to produce certain fruit in my life of how I show up, of how I interact, of how I engage, of how I actually show up as a healthy, happy, whole person. But then if I'm not seeing that fruit, then I need to be able to change the focus. Well, my focus has been on me. Okay, I need to change that. So I'm not actually focused solely on me, but I'm focused on someone else. Or I'm focused on how I'm growing, or I'm focused on how to actually process that emotion, that piece, that thing that's inside. How many of you here today watching this would say, hey, I struggle with triggers? Type in the word trigger in the chat. You're just like, triggers? Yeah, 100%. I get triggered when I go to the store. I get triggered when I see his car. I get triggered when I hear someone talk about this. I get triggered when we talk about narcissistic abuse. I get triggered when I hear certain like songs, see something, like all this kind of stuff. And these triggers will keep you in a place that you will always be the victim to them. So, like for me, I would be at the place where I would get a trigger and then I would respond to it, being like, okay, this is just the natural response of what I was used to, what I was programmed to do. But when you have a trigger coming into your life, I want you to consider for a moment to stop. Be like, wait a second, let me have a pause. Let me just stop for a moment and let me actually consider, what are the facts? What are the things that are actually going on? Is this true? Is this not true? What is the evidence? What is demonstration? Going through this action. What are the actual facts? Then go back and forth of like, what have I been telling myself? Well, I've been saying this. Does that actually match up to the facts? Yes or no? Then moving through the piece of, okay, I've looked at the facts. I've talked to myself of like, okay, I think this is what I believe, but it doesn't match up with the facts. And then I make a decision of living by the facts. Living by the things that actually help you move into a place of clarity. Because if you don't move into a place of clarity, you're going to continue going through the same cycle of being triggered over and over and over again. This is like a snapshot of the stuff that we teach inside of the Clarity Challenge, helping people break down how to actually work through the emotional triggers. I know this because I have to do this on a day-to-day basis. I have to learn how to do this so that I can continue to grow and develop myself into that version of me that's able to show up differently, not getting triggered, not responding reactively, not responding as a liar, but to show up different. If you're at the place where you're like, hey, I want to show up different, I want you to consider this. Stop, get some space in between you and the trigger, write down the facts of the situation, understand what has been the focus, the story that I've told myself that has got me here, and what do I need to change it to produce a different result. If we're able to lock in this process that we teach, that we dive into, you can actually be free from the triggers that are controlling you. Because that's all they're doing. They're controlling you. You're with a toxic person and that person controls you, then you're out of that relationship and you still feel controlled because of the triggers and the emotions and the pieces that are there, the stories that tell yourself that still control you. What would it be like for you to step into a place of freedom? Where that person no longer controls you, where the triggers no longer control you, where you are actually able to stand in a place of power and certainty, understanding, hey, I don't have to be controlled by the story that I tell myself anymore. What would that actually look like? What would that actually see? How would that sound in your life?